80% of Japan is occupied by mountains. Villages that are hidden away in those mountains far flung from society are bound to develop their own unique traditions and customs. And sometimes these customs can be extraordinarily inhumane. Hello there, everybody. Welcome to another week's episode of Freaky Friday. My name is Zakimi, and I'm so excited to have you back on my channel. Today I got something interesting for you. Not necessarily a scary story, but a very disturbing custom that I found that I just was like, I have to share with everybody. So go ahead, grab a drink. I'm gonna be grabbing a drink, green tea. It's starting to get hot here in Okinawa, so it's like super refreshing to have some really cold green tea. It's like the best. So last week's episode of Freaky Friday, I did a video sharing with you one of my favorite scary Reddit stories called The Smiling Man. It's one of those stories that every time I hear it, it creeps me the hell out. If you're interested in hearing about it, please go ahead and hit the link in the description below. Today we're going to be talking about an old and disturbing custom from Japan called Ojiroku and Obasa, a practice where every sibling born after the eldest brother were turned into working slaves for the family. The custom we're going to be talking about today started back in the Edo period in the 1600s. Now, it's no secret if you have ever been to Japan that Japan has a very structured societal hierarchical law, and it's seen quite frequently in the workplace as well as schools, where the younger generation respects the elders, or even where the new employees respect the more tenured employees. It's believed that the custom came from the Confucius idea of the 5 relationships, and the relationship law basically goes like this. The ruler has the higher status than the subject, a father has a higher status than his son, and the oldest brother has a higher status than their younger brother. In more traditional Japanese households today, there still exists that ranking system even within the family, with the eldest male being the head of the household. Now, it's become a lot more lenient over the years, but old-style Japanese dynamics were based off of this. And in some sense, I guess it still is today. Like any kind of official paperwork, usually the head of the household is still considered to be the male, but like I said, as society has developed and changed over the years, it's not as strict that the male has to be the head of the household like it used to be. For instance, let's take my family for example. Although currently it shows that my grandpa is head of the household, when he passes, all that responsibility will eventually go to my mom, who is the eldest daughter, which back in the day was almost unthinkable. It would always automatically go to her younger brother, who also happens to be the eldest son. But my mom being the more responsible one out of the two, everybody knows that eventually if my grandpa passes away, my mom will be the one set to take over all the family affairs. Until not too long ago, it was actually common practice that when the parents passed away, all of the family estate would actually be left to the eldest son, while the younger siblings would be left with nothing. The reason for this is because in Japan, the eldest son is responsible for caring for his elderly parents, as well as taking on the family name and all the responsibilities that come with that. If he had younger brothers, normally the younger brothers would go off and start their own families, while the sisters would usually be married off to another family. Recently, the laws have changed so that all siblings will inherit equal amounts of the family estate, unless otherwise stated by will. But this type of discrimination between siblings was nothing compared to the customs that took place in the mountainous village in the Nagano prefecture. In the mountain region of Nagano, there existed a village where the crops didn't grow well, and most of the people there lived in poverty. See, back in the Edo period, very few people actually had money. Usually, the only people that carried the money were higher class people like the shogunates. And during the Edo period, the shogunates are the ones that ruled the land. Most people that lived in the rural countries were just farmers. Since they didn't have any money to pay regular taxes, they usually paid their taxes with rice. Now, most of these poverty-stricken farmers could not afford to raise their children equally. So usually whatever resources they had ended up going to their eldest son, because based on Japanese custom, the person that was going to take care of the land and whatever assets they had, as well as themselves as parents when they got older, was going to be the eldest son. So they invested every resource they had to that one child. Now, what makes the village in Nagano so different from the other parts of Japan, not only was the eldest son the one that got all the attention, that got all the resources, but the younger siblings that came after the eldest son, from the time they were born, were treated like slaves. They thought very little of the younger siblings, that they didn't even bother giving them a name. In fact, that's where the tradition of the Ojiroku and Obasa came from, because they just called them Ojiroku if they were male and Obasa if they were female. The Ojiroku and Obasas were not treated well. They were never allowed to leave the family home, and they devoted all their time just working within the family's home. They were never allowed to socialize with the community, never allowed to marry, never allowed to attend any festivals. In fact, most of the time, nobody ever engaged with them and nobody ever talked to them. They had no interest and no hobbies. They had nothing to look forward to except for household labor. These people were isolated, these people were neglected, and these people were deprived of their basic human rights, just because they were born after the oldest son. Due to years of isolation and neglect, eventually their personality started to mimic that of a robot, meaning that they developed an inability to do anything without being told first what to do. I mean, think about it. These people were neglected and isolated for so long that they lost all trace of their personality, their ability to make any facial expressions, their ability to communicate. I mean, they lost all of that ability. Nobody treated them like a human being. They just treated them like household slaves. And this was their own flesh and blood. This wasn't somebody that they brought over from a different country. This was their child. This was their younger brother, their younger sister. Like, they were treating their own flesh and blood like slaves. Their entire life's purpose was just to serve their older brother and the family. The reason why the custom of the eldest son inheriting all the land became a thing, if the families were to divide equally the land amongst all of their children, the original land the family owned would become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And rice, which was pretty much used alongside currency at the time, needs a lot of room to grow abundantly. And in a time when food was very sparse, the rice from these farmers were very, very important for the shogunates, not only to feed themselves and the samurais, but also to help feed the rest of the people in the land. If the farmers couldn't grow their rice properly, that means the rice tax wouldn't get paid, which means that most people wouldn't get fed. People would starve. So to keep that from happening and making sure the land was big so that the rice would grow properly, the shogunates decided that the only person that was allowed to inherit all the land was the eldest son. When you think about somebody who lacks the ability to make an expression or who lacks the ability to communicate, you can't help but think about somebody who has been through some traumatic experiences in their life. It reminds me of kids who were found locked in basements for years, and when they were finally discovered, they were discovered in almost a catatonic state, like almost no expressions, very little ability to communicate, very little mental development. And when you think about that and when you hear about that, it usually comes with a tragic amount of abuse and neglect. The beginning of Ojiroku and Obasa customs started back in the Edo period in the 1600s, but the last known Ojiroku and Obasa existed in 1965. A psychologist named Kondo Renji conducted psychological studies trying to determine the long-term effects that these Ojiroku and Obasa faced through neglect. At first, when he was trying to interview the Ojiroku and Obasa, they weren't cooperating. They barely even acknowledged his existence, both physically and verbally. They didn't say anything to him. They just kind of stared at him with blank expressions on their faces. In hopes to help them relax, Kondo Renji and his team gave the Ojiroku and Obasa a sedative known as Amital, and it helped. As the effects of the drug took hold, the Ojiroku and Obasa's expression started to soften, and they started to communicate with Kondo and his team, albeit minimally. And this is what they said. "We're not close to anyone. We don't talk to anyone. We have no fun or happy memories. We hate meeting new people. We hate being talked to because we're stupid. Our home is number one. If we go anywhere, we can't do anything. There's nothing wrong with working all the time. We have nothing to complain about." Pretty much just sounds like a rehash of what they've been told their entire lives. Like, this is, to me, it just sounds like something that their brother, their masters, their family, whatever you want to call them, was, basically drilled into their head from a young age. Like, you're not worth anything, didn't even really have the ability to think for themselves. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know about you. Let me know in the comments what you think, but I definitely feel like that's what it sounds like to me, that they're just regurgitating what they've been told their entire life. And it really makes me wonder how somebody can do that to their own flesh and blood. How did a mother feel carrying her child for 9 months, only to know that the child that she was going to give birth to was going to be nothing more than a slave, wasn't even going to be treated like a proper human being? You know, like, I can't fathom what that must have felt like as a mom. But then we have to remember as well that in that period of Japan when the shoguns ruled the land, like, it was a brutal life. There was a lot of people that were very, very poor and very, very hungry. And when you have no money and many mouths to feed, and you got people banging on your door, you know, expecting to be paid what little you have, I don't know, but I think it can lead people to do whatever they can to survive, even if it is inhumane. I mean, it's crazy though when you think about it, right? Like, where you're born and when you're born can completely change the course of your life. I mean, this is just one of those unfortunate cases where a child can't pick what family they're born into, or like the circumstances surrounding their birth and their life. You know, when I first read about the Ojiroku Obasa, I mean, my heart broke. I mean, it was really sad to me to think that somebody could come into this world, not even be given a chance. You know, just like automatically you're thrust into this role of just serving other people without any chance at love, any chance at some kind of affection, any kind of communication, any kind of like social human to human interaction. It made me very grateful that I was born in a time and place where I didn't have to make those kind of choices or have those kind of experiences in order to survive. That's it, guys. I just really wanted to share this I know it's not necessarily a scary story, you know, like the ghost stories or like the story that I shared last week, like the smiling man. But when I read this custom, I was like, holy crap, like I didn't know anything about this. And it's a very region-based custom because this specifically happened in the mountainous village in the Nagano prefecture. Now, at the time, I know there's a lot of different parts of Japan that had other customs kind of based around this, but this specific custom called Ojiroku and Obasa, like I didn't know anything about, and I just it was I don't know, it's just really hard to wrap your head around. So let me know in the comments below what you guys thought about this custom, taking into consideration the time period when this custom was a thing and the amount of poverty that these people faced. How does it make you feel that sometimes people have to make these hard choices that negatively affect one person for the benefits of many? And if you like this scary Japanese custom, please go ahead and consider hitting that like button so that I know that you liked it enough so that I could make more. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button. All right, thank you guys so much for tuning into this week's episode of Freaky Friday. If I don't see you on my Tuesday's video of Talkin' Vloggin', then I'll see you next Friday in my other Freaky Friday video. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you next time. Peace. Bye.